So one of my neighbors, I think, had been watching some of these videos and decided that he would set me the task and said, "Hey, why do those videos? It's so pretty where we live. Walk up to the promontory." And I'm not sure whether he meant that as in walk up there because it's a nice view, or walk up there because I want to see what you're like out of puff and maybe you won't make it and you could die. But anyway, if you can't see this hill in the top, I'm going to walk up to the top of this, so it's a few miles. One of the first topics I want to cover is personality traits. And my job as a CEO, 90% of the success of a company is around the people, the dynamics, and the synergy of that. Jeff Betancourt, his dad gave him a piece of advice years ago and basically said, "Son, there's only two types of people. There's doers and there's victims. Don't be a victim." The second piece, which was an observation, and it's more than somebody had given me, is that inside of a business, you generally end up with a 10-10-80 rule. 10% of people are actively trying to dismantle the organization. They're in a grump, they don't want to be there. 10% are working super hard to try and do anything possible to make the company a success. And about 80% of the people basically will go with the flow. So you got to figure out who's the disruptors and who are the influencers, and you need to basically either convert the disruptors or box them in, and you need to celebrate the influencers. Robert Burgelman wrote a book called Strategy is Destiny. He came in to present a strategy session for my company when I was working for BEA Systems, and one section that he talked about, which I really took to heart, was around laying out a strategy and making sure that you can accommodate gravitational pull. A good example would be cloud computing. If you actually didn't accommodate cloud computing or AI now, then your strategy is for nothing. And those are market forces or gravitational pulls. You should always have an air gap or a distance between where you work and a different feel. So for instance, if you work in Silicon Valley and you live in Silicon Valley, you kind of never leave work. We lived with this road called Highway 17 that was a ziggy-zaggy road through the mountains. And so I would leave work pretty frustrated, and the drive home with a bit of music and the concentration actually enabled me to decompress before I got home. By the way, this is going to be a straight shot up. So if I seem like I'm going to be out of breath, it's a hell of a climb, and you'll see by the top. If you're planning to leave a company, make sure you're leaving it from the highest springboard. So in other words, get the best out of the company you can. Test an organization to see how much they need you. So for instance, when I was looking at joining EMC, Pat Gelsinger was part of the recruitment team, and he wanted to push me really quick. So he rang me up just before Christmas and said, "You know, we need you to join." So I said, "Well, that's great, but I'm in the middle of selling a company. Would you want me to walk away from the team? And is that the type of person you want to hire?" Of which he said, "If you verbally commit to the job, it's yours. I'll put it on hold. This is a leg race, not a sprint. And I appreciate your candor." My dad asked me to do some digging one day, of which I was doing a pretty half-assed job of. And he basically said, "Do a job properly or don't bother doing it at all. Take all the advice you can, but you only need to action the advice that makes sense." In other words, listen, suck in all the information, analyze it, and then action what's necessary. There's an old boss of mine called Frank Emerson. When I started off in sales, I used to go in and ask him lots of questions. And I went in and he gave me a bit of tough love. He basically said, "Next time you come in, I'm going to ask you, what were your 3 answers to the question that you summarily dismissed? And if you don't have those, I'm going to fire you." I thought the guy was an arsehole, So I went back to my desk, sulked at a question, nearly jumped up and went to ask him. And then I thought, screw it, what would I do? And I basically answered my own question and realized he was damn right. It's much easier to get someone to do it for you than you doing it yourself. The way to be invaluable to a business isn't learning something and keeping it to yourself, but learning something, teaching other people, making yourself redundant out of that, learning something else. Surround yourself with people that you trust. And it's like being in a firefight in a foxhole. Ensure that everybody around you has your back. I started working with Intel, and they had the attitude of disagree and commit. Really tough. You get in a room, you'd fight it out emotionally, and then the intention is when you leave the room, you know, you decide, regardless of whether it's your opinion or not, to form that and move forward. NetApp that I worked with at the time was consensus driven. I love the company, but culturally, it is very difficult to move anything on when you're consensus driven. And so I find that consensus is tough. Disagree and commit is aggressive, but actually makes a hell of a lot of sense. And the other one that I absolutely hate is agree and subvert, which is you sit in a room and talk to people, they go, yeah. Then they walk out of the room, and the next thing they're crapping on you with everybody that can to submarine the deal. Steve Manley always talked about magic beans. What he meant by that is what were the unique things that your product has, and then how do you formulate a strategy around them, because you need to be as competitive as possible and being involved with. I always try and figure out what the magic beans are. A couple from Jeremy Burton, he always said that in a presentation, let's say you're doing 90 minutes in front of an audience of 14,000 people, you really want to figure out the 3 things you want to say, and everything else in it is theatrics to reinforce those 3 things. Otherwise, what happens is you bang too much information at people, they glaze over, you've done a great presentation and left them with nothing. The second thing he said is marketing expense, 50% of it is crap. The art of marketing is figuring out which 50% is successful, and I buy that totally. Make a decision when you can afford to or you can't afford not to. One of my favorite ones I like to talk about is basically, why do you buy a drill bit? And the question is, do you buy a drill bit to drill a hole? Do you buy a drill bit to drill a hole, put a raw plug in, and put a hanger on to put a picture up because you bought a gift for your wife and you've been too busy? The reason I say that is a lot of marketing talks about the reason that you buy a drill bit is to drill a hole. What you really need to do is to tease it out, which is, yeah, but why do you need the hole? Be who you are, and if they don't like it, then go somewhere where they do. And I've lived vicariously with that. It's a level of authenticity that I deliver and consistently try to, and I espouse it on my team. One of the most recent pieces of advice that I've stuck to and taken to heart was a guy called David Coit, and he said velocity is value. Best way I can describe it is I always thought that if I took over a startup that was challenged, they hit a wall, it's sort of like a bottle of wine that missed its drinking window. And when that happens, the people in the organization are kind of, their heads are down and the wind is out of the sails. If you then repair the business and then get the momentum back, it's almost like you've taken the bottle of wine, extracted all of the goodness out of it and turned it into a great bottle of port. It still has a drinking window. Pour on the gas, execute professionally, and don't forget that there's always a wall that you could face plant into. And so, you know, count your blessings. Golf's one of those things that you can play and you can concentrate on your own game. And so you're basically playing a lot against yourself, and it's a real head game. Tennis is fascinating because one of the things you have to watch with tennis is never to basically play at somebody else's level. And I think in life, it's an important message that says, you know, if people are sort of shitty to you, If you're shitty back to them, you're playing at their game, you're not playing your own game. So I think you should sort of, you know, live by your own ethical, moral compass. You know, you'll sleep well at night and you'll know that you did what you felt was the right thing. I did a bunch of work for Bain way back at BEA as a consultant. And I remember that the lady that I was working for turned around to me and said, the only thing I ask you to do is let the data take you to the answer. I didn't really understand that because I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest. But what I did is I let the data constantly tease out and I questioned the data to give me the answer. And then later on, I met a guy who was very confident he knew the answer in something. And then he basically massaged filters in spreadsheets to allow the data to fully prove out that he was correct in his original assumptions. Joe Tucci, who's the CEO of BEA, I remember the first time I met him and I asked him, I don't understand why you're still working, because there's such a huge tax on the job. You end up doing 10% of what you love and 90% of what you're not. And he said, well, the funny thing is, the more successful you get, the more you understand what you love and what you don't like. And he said, I've just got to this fortunate position that 100% of my time I can spend doing things I love, and I just hiring people to do things I don't. And I laughed, but in reality, you know, what I've done is I've tried to focus my attention on building a team that are brilliant at things that I'm not good at. There was actually a speaker came in once, and he was saying that from a human nature, we always practice things that we're not good at. And in fact, that's kind of the opposite of what you should do with business, because you should find what people are exceptional at and then get them to hone that craft. And when they're not good at, give that to someone else. There's a book called Good to Great. And in it, they talk about having the right people on the bus. And I think that I extend that metaphor by, you need to know where the bus is. You need to clearly articulate the bus direction with a North Star. You need to get the right people on the bus. And very importantly, you need to get the right people on the bus in the right seat.